The emergency alarms had been screaming for 3 hours straight in the Galactic Council's central command facility. Nobody bothered to silence them anymore because the warnings had become meaningless. Every sensor array, every defensive grid, every military outpost was reporting the same impossible data. Human vessels were simply ignoring everything the galaxy threw at them. High Chancellor Drevak slammed his clawed fist against the observation window, watching another failed weapons test play out in the distance. The experimental plasma cannon, built specifically to counter human shielding technology, discharged its full payload directly at a single human transport ship. The crew didn't even adjust course. The devastating energy blast just curved around the vessel like water flowing past a stone, dispersing harmlessly into empty space. 3 billion credits of research and development rendered useless in 4 seconds. Ambassador Reln folded her feathered wings tight against her body, a sign of deep concern among her species. She had witnessed 17 civilizations rise and fall during her 2 centuries of diplomatic service. None of them had ever presented a challenge like humanity. They didn't conquer through superior firepower or ancient technology. They simply existed in a way that made conflict impossible. Every ambush was avoided, every trap was circumvented, every strategic advantage evaporated before it could be exploited. The holographic display in the center of the chamber flickered to life, showing the latest intelligence report. Scientist Mora's crystalline form materialized, her faceted surface reflecting the dim emergency lighting. Her voice carried the harmonic resonance typical of her species, but lacked its usual calm certainty. The data she presented was unprecedented and deeply troubling. 12 separate military alliances had attempted to halt human expansion over the past standard year. Each operation had been planned in absolute secrecy, utilizing the most advanced stealth and encryption technologies available. Yet every single assault force found their targets already evacuated, their approach vectors blocked by convenient asteroid fields that hadn't existed in previous scans, their supply lines mysteriously compromised by equipment failures that shouldn't have been possible. The humans never fired back. They didn't need to. They just weren't where the weapons pointed. It was like trying to punch smoke or capture shadows. Frustration was turning to fear across every inhabited sector of known space. Drevak addressed the assembled council members with barely controlled rage. He represented the military coalition of 47 species, all of whom had invested enormous resources into stopping what they viewed as an existential threat. Humanity refused to submit to technological assessment protocols, ignored territorial agreements, and expanded wherever they pleased. Their very existence undermined the carefully maintained hierarchy that had kept galactic civilization stable for millennia. But Mora's research suggested something far more disturbing than mere technological superiority. Human defensive capabilities didn't rely on advanced machinery or energy shields. The humans themselves were the defense system. Somehow, impossibly, they knew what was coming before it happened, not through sensors or intelligence networks, but through something the galaxy had never encountered before. Reln proposed the unthinkable, actually talking to humanity instead of attacking them. The suggestion was met with derisive scoffs from the military faction. They had tried communication, tried threats, tried negotiations. Humans responded politely to everything, agreed to nothing, and continued doing exactly what they wanted. There was no leverage, no pressure point, no way to compel compliance. The chamber's security system suddenly chimed. An unauthorized presence had been detected. Impossible, given the facility's location in a classified sector of space, surrounded by defensive platforms that could vaporize entire fleets. Yet the sensors clearly showed a single human signature walking through corridors that required 17 different biometric authentications to access. Captain Ross entered the council chamber without escort or permission. He wore the simple gray uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, carried no weapons, and radiated an infuriating sense of calm. The guards who should have stopped him stood frozen, their weapons aimed but not firing. Later, they would report feeling certain that shooting would be a terrible mistake, though none could explain why. Ross took a position at the center of the chamber, directly beneath the holographic displays showing humanity's unstoppable advance. He didn't wait for permission to speak. His voice carried easily through the vast space despite its normal volume. Everyone present found themselves listening despite their anger and fear. He offered to explain everything, the source of human defensive capabilities, why force would never work, and what the Council would need to accept going forward. But he warned them first. The truth would challenge every assumption they held about reality, consciousness, and the nature of cause and effect. Some species had difficulty processing the implications. Psychological trauma was possible. Drevak erupted from his seat, demanding immediate answers and threatening military escalation. His species had dominated this sector for 3,000 years through strength and discipline. They would not surrender to cryptic warnings from primitives who had barely left their home system a century ago. Ross simply smiled. It wasn't mockery or arrogance, just genuine amusement. He gestured to the holographic displays showing failed military operations, avoided ambushes, and frustrated strategic planning. Every attempt to fight something the Council couldn't perceive was inherently doomed. You cannot shoot what you cannot predict. You cannot trap what knows the trap before it's built. You cannot fight an enemy who experiences time differently than you do. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the emergency alarm seemed to quiet in anticipation. Ross prepared to explain what evolution on Earth's chaotic surface had done to human neurology. How survival in unpredictable conditions had forced humanity to develop capabilities that transcended the limitations of linear causality. The Council was about to learn why they were helpless. Ross reached into his uniform pocket and produced a small metal sphere. He placed it carefully on the Council's central display table where everyone could observe it. The simple action immediately captured the attention of every being in the chamber. Sometimes the most profound demonstrations required nothing more than a child's toy. He asked each council member to predict where the sphere would roll if he pushed it. Drevak answered first with absolute confidence. Physics dictated the trajectory based on force applied, surface friction, and gravitational vectors. Mora provided calculations down to 3 decimal places. Reln offered a probabilistic range accounting for minor variables. Every answer relied on mathematics, sensors, and established scientific principles. Ross nodded thoughtfully and pushed the sphere. It rolled exactly where Drevak predicted. The Chancellor looked smug until Ross asked a different question. What if you could know the result without calculation, without sensors, without conscious analysis? What if the answer simply existed in your awareness the moment the possibility arose? What if cause and effect were not sequential events but simultaneous experiences? The crystalline scientist leaned forward, her internal lattices refracting light in patterns that indicated intense focus. She had spent months analyzing human defensive capabilities, and her conclusions defied conventional understanding. Humans possessed what they casually referred to as intuition, but it operated at a level far beyond simple pattern recognition. They perceived probability fields that other species couldn't detect. They navigated multiple potential futures simultaneously, collapsing quantum uncertainty in their favor without conscious effort. Ross confirmed Mora's analysis with disturbing casualness. Humanity's evolutionary environment had demanded this adaptation. Earth was a planet that constantly tried to destroy its inhabitants through earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, unpredictable weather patterns, and massive predators. Species that evolved there either developed predictive awareness or went extinct. Human neurology restructured itself over millions of years to sense danger before it fully manifested. What began as survival instinct eventually became an ability to perceive causality itself. He demonstrated by asking Drevak to order an immediate attack on a human cargo vessel currently in high orbit. The Chancellor eagerly complied, certain that surprise would provide advantage. The Council's most advanced warship broke from its patrol route and accelerated toward the target. Its weapons charged, targeting solutions locked, firing sequence initiated. The human ship changed course 30 seconds before the attack order was transmitted. It wasn't reacting to sensors detecting the threat. The crew simply felt that continuing their current heading would be unwise. The warship's captain reported complete confusion. All tactical data suggested the ambush should have succeeded. Stealth protocols were perfect. Attack vector was optimal. Timing was precise. Yet the target had moved as if reading the orders directly from Drevak's mind. In a sense, Ross explained, that was exactly what happened. Humans didn't read thoughts, but they sensed intentions. Decisions created ripples in probability that human neurology perceived like sound waves. When Drevak chose to attack, that choice became a pattern that every human within range felt instinctively. Ambassador Reln finally understood why centuries of diplomatic experience had failed her. Humans instantly sensed dishonesty, hidden agendas, and manipulative tactics. They couldn't be deceived because deception itself was a pattern they perceived. She had wondered why human negotiators always seemed to know her bottom line before discussions began. Now the answer was obvious and humbling. Mora presented the political implications. The galaxy's entire power structure rested on technological superiority. Civilizations with better weapons, stronger shields, and faster ships dominated those without. But technology meant nothing against beings who sensed attacks before weapons powered up. Military force couldn't touch enemies who predicted every tactical decision. Economic pressure failed because humans anticipated market manipulation. The carefully constructed hierarchy was obsolete. Several council members immediately proposed alternative approaches: biological warfare targeting human neurology, genetic attacks designed to destroy their predictive abilities, weapons that eliminated probability itself. Ross listened patiently to each suggestion before explaining why they would fail. Humans had already sensed these proposals forming in the minds of their advocates. Countermeasures were already being developed. Humanity existed 3 steps ahead of every threat. Drevak refused to accept this reality. His species had maintained dominance for 3 millennia through strength, discipline, and strategic superiority. He would not concede defeat to beings who achieved their position through what amounted to cosmic cheating. Evolution shouldn't grant such overwhelming advantages. It violated the fundamental fairness of natural selection. Ross gently corrected this assumption. Humanity's abilities came at enormous cost. The same neurology that allowed predictive awareness also made humans vulnerable to sensory overload, psychological trauma, and existential confusion. Perceiving multiple futures simultaneously was exhausting. Knowing terrible outcomes before they occurred was psychologically devastating. Many humans struggled with the burden of awareness that other species never experienced. They didn't choose this capability, they endured it. The council fractured in real time. Some members wanted immediate surrender and integration into human-led governance. Others demanded continued resistance regardless of cost. Relm proposed treating humanity as equals and establishing genuine cooperation. Drevak stormed from the chamber, vowing to find weapons that could hurt beings who saw every attack coming. Ross revealed one final truth that silenced the remaining debate. Humanity had predicted this exact meeting down to individual statements and emotional reactions. Multiple human vessels were positioned to intercept Drevak's inevitable assault. Every possible council decision had been anticipated and planned for. Humanity didn't want to conquer the galaxy. They simply refused to be conquered. But if forced to demonstrate their full capabilities, they would do so without hesitation. The council sat in stunned silence. They had no moves left. Every strategy was known, every plan was countered, every hope was premature. Humanity was completely untouchable, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. 3 weeks after Ross's revelation, Drevak launched his secret operation. 12 species had contributed ships, weapons, and personnel to a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm human colonies through sheer numbers. The fleet assembled in a hidden nebula, communications silent, every vessel operating under complete electromagnetic blackout. Even Drevak's closest allies didn't know the full plan until the final attack order transmitted. The Armada jumped simultaneously to 5 human settlements. 3,000 warships materialized in perfect formation, ready to demonstrate that quantity could overcome quality. targeting computers locked onto cities, defensive platforms, and orbital facilities. This time there would be no escape, no prediction, no miraculous evasion. Every target was abandoned. The colony stood empty, power systems shut down, no life signs anywhere. The human populations had evacuated 48 hours before the fleet even assembled. Buildings were intact but completely vacant, as if every resident had simply decided to leave at the same moment. Drevak's fury manifested as incoherent screaming across all command channels. Then the trap activated. Not weapons or explosives, but navigational hazards positioned with surgical precision. Asteroid fields that hadn't existed in previous surveys now blocked retreat vectors. Gravity wells from dormant brown dwarfs suddenly pulled ships off course. Solar flares erupted from nearby stars with timing so perfect it seemed orchestrated. The fleet began tearing itself apart through cascading collisions and spatial hazards. Human forces never fired a shot. They simply arranged the environment and let physics do the work. Drevak's commanders made panicked decisions trying to save their vessels, but every choice led to worse outcomes. Formations broke apart, ships collided, retreat routes led into more traps. Humanity had predicted not just the attack, but every desperate reaction that would follow. The casualty reports devastated the Council. Thousands of vessels destroyed, tens of thousands of crew members dead, entire species' military capacity crippled. Meanwhile, humanity suffered zero losses. The asymmetry was so complete it stopped feeling like warfare and started resembling extermination. Drevak faced immediate calls for his arrest and trial for crimes against his own alliance. Governor Patricia stood on the observation deck of humanity's Haven colony, watching refugees arrive from evacuated settlements. Children played in temporary housing while adults worked to establish new infrastructure. Nobody looked frightened or traumatized. This had become routine for humanity. Sense danger, relocate, return when safe. The cost in resources was enormous, but casualties remained non-existent. She addressed visiting alien diplomats with patient exhaustion. Humans didn't enjoy their abilities. Every human child learned to manage the constant sensory input of possible futures. They couldn't turn it off. Probability flowed through their awareness like background noise. Adapting to this had required developing meditation techniques, psychological frameworks, and cultural practices no other species needed. Humans didn't feel superior. They felt tired. Reln arrived with a proposal that represented months of careful negotiation. Establish a new galactic framework based on cooperation rather than hierarchy. Each species would contribute according to their natural capabilities. Humans would provide predictive security and strategic planning. Other species would handle manufacturing, resource extraction, research specialties that required linear thinking. Build something greater than any single civilization could achieve alone. Patricia listened carefully but expressed justified skepticism. How many more attacks would come before the galaxy accepted reality? How many more Drevaks would emerge, convinced they could find the magic weapon that would bring humanity down? Cooperation sounded wonderful but required trust that current circumstances hadn't earned. Meanwhile, Mora made a discovery that changed everything. Buried in human genetic code were markers suggesting their predictive abilities weren't unique. Several other species showed similar patterns, though undeveloped. Given specific evolutionary pressures and millions of years, those species might develop comparable capabilities. Humanity's advantage was temporary. The galaxy could eventually level the playing field naturally. This revelation produced opposite reactions. Some species saw hope for future balance. Others panicked at the thought of multiple civilizations possessing human-level predictive abilities. The resulting power dynamic would be unmanageable. Galactic civilization might fragment into isolated predictive species, unable to coexist because everyone would know everyone else's plans. But the most immediate crisis came from Drevak's increasingly desperate research. The disgraced chancellor had retreated to a secret facility with his remaining loyalists. They were developing something unprecedented, a weapon that didn't attack matter or energy but targeted probability itself. If humans sensed futures, eliminate the concept of predictable futures. create chaos so absolute that even human intuition became useless. Patricia felt the threat emerging like storm clouds on the horizon. For the first time in generations, human predictive abilities couldn't clearly perceive what was coming. The future in certain regions of space appeared foggy, uncertain, painful to contemplate. Children reported nightmares. Adults experienced disorientation. Something was interfering with humanity's most fundamental sense. Ross confirmed the worst. Drevak's weapon was working. Preliminary tests created zones where causality broke down. In those zones, humans suffered severe neurological distress. Their greatest strength became their greatest weakness. Brains evolved to sense patterns, experienced agony when patterns ceased to exist. Several scout ships had entered affected regions and never reported back. The galaxy watched with mixed emotions. Humanity finally. Bleeding, finally vulnerable, finally capable of being hurt. Some celebrated while others recoiled at the cruelty. Mora warned loudly that the weapon was destabilizing reality itself. Effects were spreading beyond intended zones. If not stopped, it might unravel causality across entire sectors. Both humans and aliens faced extinction. Patricia made the hardest decision of her career. Humanity would not retaliate. They would not reveal additional capabilities or demonstrate their full power. Instead, they would ask for help. She reached out to Realm and proposed a desperate joint operation, humans and aliens working together to stop a threat that endangered everyone. The question was whether trust could grow fast enough to survive what was coming. Bate Harper tried to focus on the mission briefing while her head felt like it was splitting open. The chaos zones Drevak's weapon created weren't just disrupting probability. They were actively hostile to human neurology. Her predictive sense was screaming contradictory information simultaneously. She would die in the next mission, and she would survive, and she would never go, and she had already returned. The paradox was physically painful. Across the briefing room, Kuril adjusted his environmental suit with trembling manipulator appendages. The Novan engineer had volunteered despite his species' natural terror of humans. He had lost colleagues to Drevak's obsession, watched friends descend into paranoid madness trying to build weapons against the inevitable. Enough was enough. Some lines shouldn't be crossed regardless of fear. The Joint Task Force represented 8 species working together for the first time in galactic history. Humans provided 6 vessels and 20 personnel. Alien civilizations contributed technology, ships, and crews. The mission parameters were simple and terrifying. Penetrate the Chaos Zone, reach Drevak's facility, destroy the weapon before it consumed reality. Success unlikely, casualties certain, failure meant extinction. Mora's briefing covered the technical challenges. The weapon existed partially outside normal spacetime, making conventional navigation impossible. Human predictive abilities would fail inside the zone, potentially causing neurological damage. Alien equipment would malfunction in unpredictable ways. Communication would be unreliable. They would be blind, lost, and helpless. The only advantage was diversity, maybe. Different species, sensing reality differently, could compensate for each other's failures. Patricia addressed the volunteers with honest appreciation. None of them had to be here. Humans could attempt this alone and probably fail. Aliens could abandon human space and hope the chaos didn't spread. Instead, they chose cooperation, chose to trust former enemies, chose survival over pride. She didn't promise victory. She promised their sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. The task force launched under escort from both human and alien vessels. The cooperative fleet represented a symbolic gesture, unity in the face of existential threat. But everyone understood the escorts couldn't help once the mission entered the Chaos Zone. The volunteers would be truly alone against something that defied physics itself. Bate commanded the human contingent from a modified transport vessel. Her crew consisted of other predictors who had volunteered knowing the danger. Some were parents, some were artists, some were scientists. All of them felt the pull of duty stronger than the fear of pain. Humanity had always protected others. This was just another impossible situation requiring impossible courage. Kuril led the alien engineering team from a Novan research ship. His people specialized in adaptive technology. Their equipment could theoretically reconfigure itself in response to changing physical laws. Theoretically, nobody had tested it against probability disruption. His crew shared his mixture of determination and terror. They were about to attempt something their species considered mythologically impossible. The chaos zone boundary appeared as a distortion in space itself. Reality twisted, probability manifested visually, cause and effect existed simultaneously. Human crews immediately suffered severe reactions. Bait vomited as her predictive sense overloaded. Other humans collapsed, screamed, or simply shut down as their neurology tried processing infinite futures at once. Alien ships fared no better. Kuril watched his instruments display contradictory readings. The ship was moving forward and backward and sideways and not moving at all. His navigation computer crashed attempting to plot a course that made sense. Gravity fluctuated randomly. Inertia became optional. The fundamental forces of physics were having an argument with themselves. Communication broke down within minutes. Messages arrived before they were sent. Conversations happened in reverse. Some transmissions never arrived while others arrived multiple times. Bait tried coordinating the fleet but couldn't determine if her orders were being received, ignored, or executed before she gave them. The task force separated in the confusion, each vessel fighting its own battle against chaotic reality. Bait's crew huddled together, holding hands, trying to anchor themselves to something real while probability storms raged around them. One human navigator started laughing hysterically because he could see every possible death simultaneously, and the absurdity broke his mind. Kuril's ship tumbled through space that didn't obey consistent geometry. His crew worked frantically to recalibrate equipment that kept reconfiguring itself incorrectly. The ship's AI developed multiple conflicting personalities. Life support systems cycled between heating and cooling randomly. They were being driven insane by a universe that refused to make sense. Then Bait felt something impossible, a pattern in the chaos, not a future or a past, but something deeper. Causality itself was fighting back. Reality wanted to be stable. Existence preferred order. The weapon was forcing entropy, but nature resisted. She focused on that sensation, ignoring the pain, pushing through the contradictions. Her ship adjusted course, following nothing but intuition. Probability said they would crash, but instinct said otherwise. She trusted the feeling. The vessel threaded through spatial distortions that shouldn't exist. Bait wasn't navigating. She was sensing where reality wanted the ship to be. Meanwhile, Kuril stopped trying to force his equipment to behave logically. Instead, he improvised. If physics was flexible, he would be flexible too. He reconfigured systems on the fly, let randomness guide his repairs, accepted chaos as the new normal. His crew followed his lead. They stopped fighting the environment and started dancing with it. Against all probability, Bait's ship and Kuril's vessel found each other in the chaos. Neither could explain how. Perhaps cooperation created its own pattern. Perhaps desperation transcended physics. They locked together, human intuition and alien ingenuity stabilizing each other enough to continue. Through the noise and pain and impossible circumstances, Bait sensed the facility ahead. Drevak's creation pulsed like a wound in reality. They were close. Now they just had to survive long enough to stop it. The facility existed in a space where architecture argued with itself. Walls flickered between solid and transparent. Floors led in impossible directions. Rooms occupied the same location simultaneously. Bait and Kuril's combined teams pushed through corridors that hurt to perceive. Reality here wasn't broken. It was actively rejecting the concept of consistency. Drevak's scientists had become part of their creation. Their bodies merged with machinery, consciousness spread across multiple timelines, sanity abandoned for obsessive purpose. They didn't acknowledge the intruders because from their perspective the intruders had already failed, were currently succeeding, and would never arrive. All outcomes existed at once. The weapon itself defied description. Calling it a machine implied structure it didn't possess. It was more like a living argument against cause and effect. Bait's predictive sense recoiled from perceiving it directly. The device didn't just disrupt probability, It convinced reality that probability was optional. Existence itself was negotiable. Kuril attempted technical analysis and found his measurements meaningless. The weapon consumed energy it hadn't received yet, occupied dimensions that mathematics said couldn't exist, operated on principles that contradicted themselves. Shutting it down through conventional means was impossible because it had already adapted to every potential shutdown procedure. At the facility's core they found Drevak, or what remained of him. His consciousness had fragmented across the timeline, existing in past, present, and future simultaneously. He ranted about saving the galaxy while destroying it, spoke in languages that wouldn't be invented for centuries, wept for losses that hadn't occurred yet. The weapon had granted him his wish. Humanity could no longer predict his actions because his actions existed outside sequential time. Bate tried reasoning with him, pointed out that everyone would die including his own people. Drevak laughed in harmonics. Death and life were the same in probabilistic superposition. He had transcended limitation, become one with chaos. The galaxy would be free from human prescience even if freedom meant extinction. Better to die than live under beings who knew every secret. Kuril focused on the technical problem. Somewhere in this nightmare of recursive causality was a solution. He studied the weapon's chaotic patterns and found something unexpected, an underlying rhythm. The device was fighting itself. Probability wanted to collapse, but the weapon kept it suspended. Reality strained against artificial uncertainty like a muscle held in permanent tension. Bates sensed the same pattern from a different angle. Her predictive abilities weren't failing here. They were overwhelmed by infinite input. Every possible future existed here simultaneously, but futures wanted to resolve. Causality had momentum. The weapon was damming a river that would eventually break through. She made a decision that would cost her everything. Instead of fighting the chaos, she embraced it, opened her predictive sense fully to the infinite possibilities. Let the contradictions flow through her neurology without resistance. Her brain wasn't designed for this. Synapses fired in patterns that would permanently damage her abilities. But in accepting the chaos, she found its center. Kuril saw what she was attempting and supported her with everything alien engineering could provide. His equipment became an anchor point. Technology that responded to logical inputs, giving Bates something solid to focus on. Human intuition and alien logic creating a stable reference point in the madness. Together, they found the weapon's vulnerability. It maintained chaos by constantly refreshing probability distributions. If they could guide those distributions toward a single outcome, causality would collapse naturally. Bate navigated futures while Kuril manipulated the technical framework. They weren't destroying the weapon. They were convincing it to resolve itself. The process was agony. Bates' predictive abilities burned out like overloaded circuits. She could feel the neural pathways that made her special dying with each moment. Kuril's equipment was consuming itself, redirecting all power to maintain the stability field. 3 of his crew members died when their life support reconfigured incorrectly. Human volunteers suffered strokes from sensory overload. But it worked. The chaos began organizing. Probability distributions selected outcomes. Futures collapsed into a single timeline. Reality remembered how to be consistent. The facility started solidifying, walls became permanent, time flowed in one direction again. Drevak achieved clarity for one final moment, his consciousness reunifying just long enough to understand what he'd done. The weapon he built to stop humanity had nearly destroyed everything. His fear had transformed into the very thing he feared. He used his last coherent thoughts to help Bate and Kuril complete the shutdown, died not as a villain, but as someone who let terror make his choices. The chaos zone collapsed, reality stabilizing outward from the facility like ripples in reverse. Across human space, colonies felt the pressure lift. Children stopped having contradictory nightmares. Adults regained clear predictive sense. The galaxy's causality repaired itself. Bates survived but changed. Her abilities reduced to barely above normal human baseline. She could still sense patterns but no longer predicted futures with clarity. The cost of saving everyone was becoming ordinary. Kuril's ship was destroyed, but he lived, stranded with human survivors who carried him to safety. News of the victory spread through both human and alien civilizations. The joint mission had succeeded where either side would have failed alone. Bate's sacrifice demonstrated humanity's values. Kuril's courage proved aliens could trust humans. Cooperation had achieved the impossible. The Council reconvened in a chamber no longer filled with fear. Realm's diplomatic faction finally held majority support. New frameworks for galactic partnership were drafted, species contributing based on capability rather than competing for dominance. Bate and Kuril became ambassadors, living symbols of what different civilizations could accomplish together. Patricia addressed the Council with quiet satisfaction. Humanity had entered the galaxy as survivors who couldn't be touched. They left this chapter as partners who chose not to be alone. Their greatest strength wasn't being untouchable. It was knowing when to lower defenses. Ross stood beside her, watching diverse species work together on shared problems. The galaxy would never return to simple hierarchies. Some civilizations still feared humanity, others wanted to exploit them. But the foundation for real cooperation existed now. The Council had watched helplessly as humanity became untouchable. Now they watched hopefully as humanity became reachable instead. Somewhere in that transition, both sides learned that vulnerability shared with allies was stronger than invincibility maintained in isolation.